Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Tompsett and my partner in crime Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how are we doing?
Living the dream, man. On to this. I've never been happier to be knee deep in draft and free agents and looking back on the season. Such a great year. There's so much fun to look back on and so much to look forward to here this offseason. I'm super excited, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. I needed a minute. We talked before. That last stretch was awesome. It was so much fun having all that everything going. But those final couple weeks going in there was a lot of content and a lot of focus and attention and everything. And when that Chiefs game ended, I completely unplugged. Like I just completely stepped away from everything. And it was nice to kind of get my head straight and just give myself a minute to decompress. And now it is kind of nice to shift gears, start digging into, draft work, trying to look at free agent pending lists, trying to project contracts for people. And all of that stuff is going to be coming for everybody. But we got a show or two here where we want to really tie a bow on this 2020 season. It was one of the most enjoyable seasons we've had in a long, long time. And I think it deserves to go through. We're going to do a review in offense and a review in defense. And I'm looking forward to tonight.
Yeah, it kind of, like you said, puts a bow on this past season. I'm sure we'll, still also dive into kind of what went wrong at the end of the season, what needs to be improved on as we talk about free agency. But this is a really nice way, I think, mentally for us and hopefully for the listeners to sort of go back a couple weeks now out of it and some of the emotional side of it removed and just talk about the year as a whole with you guys.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting kind of way to go through it because we're so used to, having to rip it down, start over. How many different guys can we cut to, get out of the horrible contracts that we have and, try to figure out a way to get better next year. And now it's kind of nice. I like the way you framed a lot of things online recently with, we don't need overhauls. We need tweaks. Like we need slight adjustments. We need to retain a lot of this talent, and we are one of the top teams in the league. And now how do we stay there and just get better in a couple little areas?
Yeah, no, I got pretty removed from my emotions almost after we were done with the show. After that game, I had already felt the season was a success before whatever the outcome was. It still hurt a little bit. I'm with everybody on that, but I was able to step away pretty quick from this season and really start looking at, okay, how bad are some of these things after that Brandon Beane press conference, some of the things we know we put out there. What I got out of the Beane press conference was more that the team needs to tweak some of the things. Obviously, you need an infusion of talent in the draft and free agency the best you can, but I don't think any of it's extreme. I think a lot of people took away from that press conference that there was some extreme things that need to be fixed and they're going to overhaul positions and how they use people. And I think you'll see some schematic differences and you'll see some additions, but I don't think you'll see anything super fancy. I think we'll get excited about some of the draft picks, but we won't see, I don't think, any big splash additions that are going to really necessarily put this team over the top. I think the team's there. They were in the Final Four this year. There's not a whole lot with the cap restrictions that they have and the young talent that they want to keep around. I don't know that there's a lot more to do. You just have to figure how to get over this hump that's Kansas City, and I think you can do it with the personnel they have and some of the additions they'll be able to get.
Yeah, and we'll go through that. We have a lot of time here, so to give you guys a rundown, we'll go through the season review on offense tonight, season review on defense next week, and then we'll start to dive in a little bit to free agency because we'll have a couple weeks there before free agency starts on March 17th. Obviously, then we'll react to some of the signings that are coming, and then we'll shift into draft mode and have a good 4 or 5 weeks leading into draft mode. So we'll have fun like we normally do. But let's look at this team on the offensive side of the ball, and there's nowhere else to start other than quarterback. And the reason for your confidence and optimism is that in today's NFL, if you have a franchise quarterback, you have sustainability and the opportunity for success. And if you don't, you need to find it. And the Bills have a franchise quarterback. And where you rank him in the top quarterbacks in the NFL, I think you can make a darn good argument he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. It doesn't really matter where. He is one of those guys. So looking at Josh Allen's season, it was nothing short of a complete raucous success in the way that they approach things. But maybe what were some things that stood out to you the most of this year and that gives you confidence going forward?
Yeah. First of all, I couldn't agree more with what you said though about having that guy at quarterback, and I think we all agree we do. I know that it's the amount of success is this one season, right? And that a lot of people are saying, well, you can't get into that, but it's been there. It's been leading up to this. I think everybody's seen it. I don't know that it's just the lens of being a fan that you think he's the guy, but I think most of us pretty much feel like he's the guy, at least for the next decade of this team, as long as he stays healthy. In that, there's going to be ebbs and flows. I think this year was a prime, one of his probably better years. He might have seasons similar to this in that 10-year stretch. It's not always going to be like this. There's going to be years where he's the 10th best quarterback in the league or whatever, has a down year. That still keeps you in contention every year.
Russell Wilson has had down years. Aaron Rodgers has had down years.
Absolutely.
You're not amazed. Tom Brady had a down year last year.
For sure.
But 4,500 yards, 37 passing touchdowns, 45 total touchdowns, or 46 with a receiving touchdown. Those kind of seasons don't happen all the time. Guys, the elite quarterbacks, the Aaron Rodgers of the world, don't have those kind of seasons every single year. He had a better statistical season than Patrick Mahomes this year. Right. That's not going to happen every year, but now he can be in that stratosphere, in that neighborhood.
But to answer your question, too, I think within that, the thing that's really fun about this is when we go back with a fine-tooth comb and look at this season, even if you just go back and watch Eric and Nate's and some of Anthony's, the breakdowns of Josh Allen, there was so much meat on the bone in this season where you just rattled off the stats. Not saying that he's going to just come out next year and fix everything that he has and just double those stats or anything, but there was a lot left on tape in every game. There was games that I think we matched up well enough with the teams that they could have won if it wasn't for the way Josh Allen played. And he led us to a lot of victories as well, but there was a number of times that Tennessee game was ugly. That was a fluky game, but Josh wasn't very good in that. He was terrible against Kansas City, really both times. And so you see all the meat on the bone that's still there, some of the poise and stuff that he still needs to work on in some of those crunch moments. We saw him running for his life against Kansas City. That's got to get fixed. He's going to have these games. With all of that talk, he was still, all those statistics, I gave him an A for the year, but just because there was a little meat on the bone, I wanted to give him an A+. I couldn't imagine a quarterback playing any better right now, but he has room for improvement, and I want to see him get there. So I want to push Josh to the A+, hopefully, in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it's fair that it wasn't it's obviously a phenomenal season. He broke almost every record the Bills ever had in passing. Most passing yards, most passing touchdowns, most total touchdowns. Not only highest completion percentage, a higher completion percentage than Tom Brady or Peyton Manning ever had in their entire career. You're talking about a really manageable interception rate. 37 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 46 total touchdowns to 10 interceptions is incredible. That's really strong. Some areas you saw poke up in the playoffs. The 26 sacks is probably more than you'd love to see, but it also goes hand in hand with his style of play.
That's who he is.
Yeah, the way that we applaud him for, stiff arming those guys and getting the ball out and then rolling to his right and hitting one of those toe drag swag catches. It's just kind of a package deal. He's never going to be that Dan Marino type guy who goes a whole season without being sacked because it's 2 steps and the ball is out over and over again. He's going to create big plays that way. I think there's still some learning that comes with that. You heard him talk about that. Some of those plays that you do still need to have some element of knowing when to live to fight another day. But it's fun that it's hard to nitpick and find concrete areas he needs to improve on. But I think it's also reassuring that he's proven he's the kind of guy who's going to still go back and work on his mechanics again. He's going to go back and, continue to develop and do things. And I think the really exciting part is he's really smart. He's a very intelligent person and is someone who's going to start to really collect a catalog of references, disguise coverages, blitzes, different schemes that he's going to start to really have that Rolodex that those mature quarterbacks have, and that's an exciting development.
Absolutely. I think I listened to the Chris Sims podcast with him I think it was right before the AFC Championship game or maybe right after the Ravens victory, but him talking about like he's his hardest critic. He said it before in press conferences. I believe it 100%. And those are the, we talked about that when people were in our mentions about him being the next Jamarcus Russell after the draft. And we said, this is the biggest difference is he's determined to be better. And he's like all the PFF people and all the people on Twitter, he talks about it. It doesn't matter to him. There's nothing there saying that he doesn't know and tells himself. So him being able to have that type of mentality and go into this offseason, you're damn right. He's going to look at those sacks and say, can't do it. We got to figure out a way to clean these things up when those sacks are happening. Some of the picks, you talked about that interception rate, that being manageable. Some of the ones he threw were still bad Josh Allen plays that he can clean up. I have every faith in the world that he can clean that up and keep who he is as a player and limit some of that stuff. So I think he goes into this offseason really more, he's fixed his mechanics, right? He did all the mechanical stuff. I think you continue to work on that. He said there was improvements there, but really it's ball, man, taking care of the ball when you're running, not throwing in double coverage, not taking big crazy sacks on third down, like learning where and how to get the ball out. Watch the Tom Brady's, watch the Aaron Rodgers even, because he does it with that type of mobility. That's really what Josh Allen has to focus on. And he's an A+. If he comes in with better ability to limit some of that sugar high stuff, and he did a good job this year. If he takes that kind of jump with that stuff, man, it's almost gone. It'll never be gone. We can live with some of it. It can't be the reason you lose big games.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we used the analogy of like guys like Brett Favre before, but I actually think he has a chance to be more efficient than that. And I think guys, some of the other guys you look at, your John Elways and people like that who still have the mobility to do those things, but weren't as reckless as what Favre was. I think there's a chance that kind of thing is in play, a more mobile Ben Roethlisberger, things like that. Now it's not unreasonable to have those kind of analogies that does look, we have something pretty special here that there aren't a lot of analogies for, because he's a pretty unique athlete in the way that he does things. Appreciate our man Ron, very generous of you guys. You guys have been awesome all season, and Ron, you've been right up there as strong of a supporter and confidant for us as anybody else. We appreciate you very much.
Thanks, man.
Before we move on to another position, I the fact that I don't really know what to talk about next is part of the issue and problem. The rest of the quarterback room, I don't know that we have anyone truly NFL caliber in my mind. Matt Barkley, Jake Fromm, Davis Webb. I think that Barkley's a average to below average backup quarterback. I think that I have no idea what Fromm is and what that is as a developmental entity. I think Davis Webb is purely a coach in a uniform kind of guy, and I don't hate him being there, and I don't think it's crazy that next year it's Josh Allen with Jake Fromm as the backup and Davis Webb as the break glass in case of emergency call-up guy. I think it sounds nice to have I'd feel better if we had an Andy Dalton or a Marcus Mariota or a Jameis Winston like some other teams do, but we'll spend other shows talking about how little money we have to spare. I don't know that an improvement at backup quarterback is in the cards, even if I kind of want one.
Yeah, and those things are pretty tough because you mentioned a handful of guys, but that's not the average quarterback room in the NFL. No. There's a huge issue with the lack of good backup quarterbacks. That's why every team, when you're seeing people willing to trade for Mariota. Now, there's rumors that he's not that good. He had one good game. He's a good backup. I think he's the perfect situation for backup. He can get you through a season if you need to. He's not going to be your guy. He's a Tyrod Taylor, I think, at this point.
Heck, Tyrod Taylor is one of those guys.
Yes. Yeah, they're just going to bounce around the NFL, and that's fine. If the Bills could get one of those guys for cheap, the way you get one of those guys cheap is a scenario that they just fall out totally from their draft stock. A Carson Wentz, but he's already got the deal, right? Like that type of similar fall from grace, though, where
just
a team just moves on.
Yeah, the timing of that musical chairs where there was a guy who thought he was going to get a shot to kind of start, and then it didn't happen, and then he's kind of stuck. The way that New Orleans stumbled into Jameis Winston for a freaking $1 million, that Cam Newton stumbled into New England for $1 million. Andy Dalton or Joe Flacco was only $1.5 million with the Jets, and I don't know that Flacco's way better than Matt Barkley, but in one of those, hey, we lost Josh Allen for 3 games, I'd feel better if it was Joe Flacco for those 3 games than Matt Barkley, I think.
I don't know, man.
Whatever. So
But
maybe
yeah,
somebody
either way.
better than Flacco. But
We're gonna
I
have
would
another
love
podcast, are
Yeah, yeah, seriously. I would like to stumble into one of those that, hey, one of those guys who didn't find the spot they thought they were going to get, we end up stealing them for $1 million, and then they try to recoup their value learning under Brian Dable and being the backup to Josh Allen on a really good team. And then going into 2022, they try to just like Jameis Winston just did with New Orleans, and then he tries to get his starting spot the next year. I'd love to stumble into one of those, but I'm not willing to spend money to do it.
Yeah, I'm torn there. If they can really stumble into it, and like you said, like a 1 year, $1 million thing to give somebody a shot. If Josh gets hurt, sure, I'm down for improving that. Otherwise, I kind of want to see what they have in Fromm, maybe this preseason. I'm not big on him. I don't think there's a lot to see, but Brandon Beane does. Brandon Beane,
sure.
Figured he was worth that pick. They kept him around. They spoke highly of what he had to go through this year in that development. So let's see what he's got. I don't know that the fall off between Matt Barkley to Fromm is going to be so significant that I'm any more worried about the backup than I was this past year. I was worried about it all year. So hopefully Josh stays healthy and that isn't a super big problem. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, and we're in that position now that I always love the Tom Moore quote that when he was the longtime offensive coordinator for the Colts and guys would ask him, hey, how come we're not practicing with the backup quarterback? And he said, you see number 18? Number 18 gets hurt, we're effed. We don't practice effed.
Right.
And he said that's what we're going to be now. If Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, the Packers are screwed. If Tom Brady gets hurt, the Buccaneers are screwed. If Patrick Mahomes gets hurt, the Chiefs are screwed. If Josh Allen gets hurt, the Bills are screwed. That's just the way that it works now. That's what happens when you have an elite quarterback.
Yeah, the only teams that aren't screwed when that happens are like the Bears. If Trubisky gets hurt and Foles is there, the drop off. Yeah. One of them might be better than the other. We don't know. There's teams like that where you have a couple mediocre guys and there is no drop off. But when you do have an elite quarterback, I mean, very rarely in NFL history has there been backups to elite quarterbacks that were ready to come in and play with the type of production. It's very rare. Aaron Rodgers is one of the few I can think of in the salary cap era. To have that guy behind ready and waiting. It doesn't happen a ton. So I don't think we're going to have the next Frank Wright isn't walking through the door that's going to lead Buffalo to playoff victories without Josh Allen. Yeah, Josh Allen gets hurt. This whole thing's done for the next year. Wrap it up.
So moving on to the next position group is the running back room. And, obviously it's really hard to be outright disappointed because there's purely a numbers game to the fact that we became one of the pass happiest teams in the NFL. The Bills threw 596 passes this year. So it's something where I'm looking for improvement coming this year, but I think that there are reasons that the production wasn't there that maybe were outside of just the running back room, and it probably is going to come up in a discussion we have later with another position room. So this year, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, a cup of coffee from Antonio Williams, and the break glass in case of emergency of TJ Yeldon was the room. Singletary went for 687 yards with 4.4 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Zach Moss had 481 yards on 4.3 yards a carry. Both of them had a little production. Singletary ended up with 38 catches for 269, so he had 956 yards from scrimmage, which is a good year. That's not terrible. 2 total touchdowns is kind of low, but obviously Josh Allen 9 rushing touchdowns takes a little bit of that away, and Zach Moss with 5 touchdowns. I think that they both had moments, and then I think their lack of bigger performance was, I'll say, equally on the offensive line that we'll talk about in a bit, but I don't think either of them did all that much to create on their own beyond what the offensive line opened either.
Yeah, I am not super high on this group this year. There was a stretch during the year where I felt that the production was just good enough for what they needed to do with this offense, the way it's built. I'm always going to prefer more production out of the run game. I know that all the analytics say pass all the time and just do it. They do. It's true. I'm always going to want to have at least an above average run game. I don't need a top tier running back room, but I want to be above average when it matters. When you really need to lean on that run game for a game, it has to be there. That was not the case this year. They did it against teams that gave up historically high rushing numbers, or not historically, but the season high rushing numbers. That's the only teams they were able to do anything well on the ground on. Luckily, they tricked Seattle into selling out for their crappy run game, and we got a free win that way. But outside of that Seattle game, nobody was really concerned about the Bills running game. And while the passing game put enough stress on defenses this year to kind of that for that to be a wash, I don't know that they're going to be able to rely on that year in and year out, where just Josh Allen dropping back and having the spread offense is going to be the path to success every year. The NFL changes. Guys are going to get a beat on that. Dable needs to get a run game going. I think you can do it with the guys they have and improving the interior offensive line. I don't know that the Bills are going to make it a huge priority outside of the draft. I think they'll draft interior offensive line, but I don't know how much that space changes. So I do think that they're going to have to bring somebody into this room that, like you said, can create in space on their own, whether it's a veteran type guy that's a James White or a James White type guy. Mm-hmm. Eric keeps talking about that. Somebody that can get the ball in space on a screenplay and make something with it themselves. There's a number of times both these guys got into space and got tackled by the first guy. I mean, they had some nice runs, but they were not making splash plays. We need a guy, doesn't have to be the fastest guy in the world, just knows how to create in space and be able to make plays when the offensive line can't, shake somebody in the backfield and get out for 5 yards. They just lacked that ability this year, which was pretty disappointing, especially with Singletary. It looked like, from his vision at times to the lack of burst, it seemed like there was just a drop off in his skill set as the year went on.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on exactly what he lost from 2019 to 2020, but it certainly seemed like there was
that way.
A little bit more acceleration, a little bit more explosion. He's not a speedy guy. He's not fast, but he has good short area quickness. He has good vision. He has good contact balance.
He can take one 50, 60 yards. He's done it.
He did. He did one this year when
right.
Dallas was kind of packing it in, or Denver was packing it in. So the combination of what we have, I'm mildly interested to see what Antonio Williams can do in camp next year. I think he's basically a, discount Zach Moss. I don't think he's some kind of signature back. I like what TJ Yeldon was supposed to be, and I think we can get better there. I think if, obviously, Eric and I talked about James White. I brought up Marlon Mack, guys like Boston Scott, somebody like that, or that kind of guy in the draft. I'm fine with. I'm going to spend a lot of time looking at who are the 3rd to 5th round receiving back guys that
maybe
Najee
we can snag
one, or Najee Harris or Travis Etienne. I'm sure will come up in the chat starting right now. So any of those kind of guys, I would like to find a reasonable investment. We have other priorities that I'd like to be able to rebuild in those other spots with the premium picks or the actual free agent money. But we need a third guy. Right now, we don't have anyone under contract that is going to be there to push either of them. I'd like a receiving threat with a little bit of wiggle and a little bit of juice in space. I think that we'll get to it when we talk about the offensive line. If we fix some things there, I think Singletary and Moss can be a productive tandem in today's NFL.
Absolutely. What would you give them for their grade? Like if QB and A, what do you give them running back?
I think they're like a C+. I think that they were just above average. I don't think they were as terrible as people think them to be. 4.4 yards a carry, 4.1. Singletary almost had 1,000 yards from scrimmage. The two of them together, 7 touchdowns. I don't think that it was terrible, but I think they were just above average.
I gave them a C-.
Yeah.
We're close. All
right. Moving into the next area, if Josh Allen wasn't the shining star of this season, it was this receiving room. And the combination of what came together from the receivers in this offense, they were the most productive wide receiver core in the NFL. They led the NFL in catches, yards, every area statistically from a receiver standpoint. Stephon Diggs shattered every team record, 166 targets, 127 catches, 1,535 yards, 8 touchdowns. Cole Beasley basically led the NFL out of the slot, 967 yards on 82 catches and 4 touchdowns. In a half a season, John Brown had 33 catches for 458 and 3 touchdowns. Gabe Davis, as a rookie, 600 yards and 7 touchdowns, and then contributions from Isaiah McKenzie and some others as we came in there. But really, we had our top 5 guys healthy and contributing the entire season, and they were the engine that made this offense go. Obviously, it was Josh Allen conducting the show, but the distribution where he went with the ball was to the receivers in this offense, and the reason was because of how much talent I just rattled off.
Yeah, and I got into some conversations, and we'll talk about tight end here in a little bit about that tight end position, and people were, that Allen just locks on to the wide receivers, and they're open. Why wouldn't you? We joked around about Stephon Diggs not being able to be guarded. It's true. There were stretches in games where Josh would just go to Diggs 4 or 5 times in a row because it couldn't be guarded, and it gains momentum and it keeps your offense flowing. And Beasley's the same way. People are like, why isn't Beasley getting going? Well, he's open, but we're just going to Diggs, And the only guy that really didn't produce in that manner, which I thought would be able to in this offense with Diggs, was John Brown. He wasn't able to be a guy that was just relied on, whether it was health or even when he was out here, to get the type of targets that he, can show that he can still be a wide receiver 1 type player like he was the previous season. So a little disappointed there. Love what Gabe Davis brought to the team. I was not ready to jump on the preseason hype train of, he makes every catch. That's cool. I've seen it 100 times. Dark Rogers really impressed me in a preseason once. Never heard from him again. So I'd heard it all. It had a great season. Really impressed me, I think, more than I could have expected.
The sideline body control and some of that stuff was way more nuanced and mature than I thought he was ready for.
Absolutely. And some of the just catches in space, he's everything I think people wanted Duke Williams to be.
Yeah, yes,
when they got Duke Williams. So they nailed that. I can't wait to see what they have from Hodgkins. I love this unit, and I don't want to see John Brown go. I know there's people out there that want to see John Brown go. Just to clear up that cap number, I don't want to see him go. I want to see this unit try to be healthy. It's hard in the NFL, but have a full healthy year with the growth that Josh has had, with the growth that Dable's had, improve some of these other pieces, man. Give Josh a little more time with a little bit better protection, improve that tight end room, get some running game going. I don't think there's a defense in the league that can stop if you keep this unit together and improve around them.
Yeah. And I think that there are – so I'm torn. I feel fairly confident John Brown is not going to make $8 million from the Buffalo Bills this year.
Sure.
I don't know that means John Brown is not going to be a Buffalo Bill this year. There are options besides that he and his agent know after an injury-plagued season at his age – he's not going to go into his age 31 season, breaking the bank in free agency. So there's going to be motivation for him to get creative with the Bills. I also think they like him, and it's not out of the question that you can do that by doing a brief extension, signing him into the 2022 season, decreasing the cap number for both years, and that, I'm fine if he's a $4 or $5 million receiver for 2 years rather than, $9.1 million in 1 year. I think that's also roughly what he'd get on the open market, and I think his agent knows that. So I think there's reasons that it's not as clear cut as people assume that he's gone. I also think a lot of people have made pretty good explanations that you can be excited about Gabe Davis and still not be ready to think he has the full skill set yet to replace John Brown. There are things that John Brown does that Gabe Davis does not do, and he has not shown the ability to separate at that degree. I think he can develop into that, but I don't know that he's all the way there yet to step into that, and that I'm not 100%. I want to find that out on the fly. I do think that there's some options to be able to go into what we're going to do from, I like Isaiah Hodgins quite a bit. I'm curious to be able to see what he shows and has there, and maybe he can do some of what Gabe Davis did as a rookie, but I hope that we can find out by having John Brown back.
Yeah. Say that's the case in preseason, and then you deal with it then, as opposed. But I don't want to go into the season removing John Brown from the offense, not replacing him with any known production that we know can do something. Maybe Kenny Stills is that guy. I don't know. Maybe they bring him, and then that's going to be the John Brown.
Or a speedster out of the draft. Like, it's feasible.
But that's not proven NFL production. That's a tough one for me because, again, like Davis, I didn't know what they. So you're banking on back-to-back drafts where your
hitting on
receivers
mid-round
are
guys
hits.
twice in a row.
Yeah, which can happen, but I'm not banking on it. So going into the season with as much as on the line, and I think the window is bigger than a lot of us feel, but they're still in a Super Bowl window right now with the guys they have. Josh Allen's going to outplay this receiving core in Buffalo most likely, but right now you have a window with a really special group. If you don't bring Brown back, say Beasley gets hurt to start the year, or his injury takes longer than expected, or whatever, he has some kind of setback, then you're really limited. You go from having a embarrassment of treasures at receiver here this year, where John Brown could be out, and you still had Gabe Davis to supplement that, and you didn't miss too much of a beat. One of those guys goes out without Brown. I don't like this.
If you ask fans who's older, Cole Beasley or John Brown, how many do you think would answer Cole Beasley?
Most.
Because Cole Beasley's older than John Brown. I think a lot of people think of.
Wow.
I think a lot of people assume that John Brown is at
They're
the
both
end,
close,
the end
right?
of his career.
Like 31, 30.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Beasley's 1 year older. But I think a fair amount of people would assume that Brown is closer to the end of his career than what Beasley is. And Beasley's actually a year older. So any of the injury concerns...
I think you could get a couple years out of each one of these guys.
For sure. Receivers age better than people realize. Like, it's not... Because of the way that the rules are called and there's no more, like, head hunting over the middle and stuff like that, it's... guys age reasonably. You have guys that are very productive into their mid-30s on a semi-regular basis. So
yeah, especially guys. One more comment on this, because I know we got to keep moving through positions, but this wide receiving core in general takes really good care of themselves.
Yes.
And one of the things Josh Allen has spoken on a number of times is John Brown teaching him how to be a professional in the NFL in a lot of ways, and how he takes care of himself and how he approaches the game. That crap matters a ton to Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. That's what they've built this locker room on. That's what the culture is. That's what the process is guys just saying to the media, like, hey, this guy's the shining example of how an NFL pro should be. All that's going to matter in this decision. And I think John Brown's camp probably respects what the Bills are doing enough, sees the window that he's in and the type of success that he can get on this team. Personally, his career is wrapping up. There might not be a better position for him to latch on and try to get to a Super Bowl before his career runs up than with Buffalo. If he goes somewhere else, it's going to be a Jacksonville. All these teams we talked about earlier offline that have a ton of money to throw around, they have that money because they're not that good yet, and they're not going to be good right away. So I think with all that, I think there's a possibility that he does either restructure or take some type of discount to stay on this team now and give some money back to the team knowing the situation.
One other spot before we move on is that tail end receiver that has been a combination of Isaiah McKenzie, Andre Roberts, even the TJ Yeldon receiving back role, that gadget player, that return guy. I've said for years now, I really wish that could be one person. I really wish the gadget jet sweep return person was one human in one roster spot. Maybe they saw a glimmer of that in Isaiah McKenzie. I'm curious. I think that Andre Roberts is a guy that knows what his market is, and I expect him to be back in Buffalo on the veteran minimum deal. I don't think that people are going to be spending huge money on returners, and I think he knows that and is just going to come back. I think there might be a little bit of a market for Isaiah McKenzie, and I hope that nobody throws, something stupid like 2 years and $2 million or $5 million a year for 2 years and like a 2-year $10 million deal at him that we can't really afford to match. I hope that we can get Isaiah McKenzie back, but I think he could be possibly replaced in the draft, or maybe they do think he can step into Roberts' role and be the returner. I don't know. Maybe they saw enough in practice to feel reassured of his ball handling and his willingness, and that punt return for a touchdown was nice. Maybe they've seen enough in practice to think that he has the reps in to do that now. I'm curious what they do at the bottom end of that receiving core.
Yeah, I think they tried to run it back with it as it was and try to bring back both Roberts and McKenzie. I agree with you. I don't know that McKenzie's – I think there's a chance one of these offensive gurus think he's going to be the next key piece to their gadget part of their offense. I think he's pretty easily replaceable, and I hate to say that about any NFL guys. He's fast. There's going to be fast guys in the draft. There always is.
I could absolutely see the coordinator coming from San Francisco who used Deebo Samuel in that role and went to the Jets. I could absolutely see them throwing
trying to get
a weird amount of money at McKenzie.
Absolutely. There's a chance that he's not there. I think that's replaceable. I don't mind the roster spots. I fight about it in my mind all the time because I hate taking up extra roster spots for special teams. But what did the Bills really miss out on by having those two? There was never a weekend where I felt, God, I wish we had that roster spot. Like, not like when we had the what was it, the Doug Marrone years or Rex Ryan, when we had the
Jordan
specialist.
Gay, Jordan Gay taking up a spot.
Dude, like that killed me. The Roberts thing I never thought of once, because also Andre Roberts, I think people were frustrated with him because there was that one game towards the end of the year where he had the bad takeout.
He had one muff and a bad takeout all at once in a short stretch. He still is coming off his third straight Pro Bowl season.
Yeah, he had so many plays where he put this team into great field position. He had for a kick returner and punt return, he had a number of what I would count as toxic differential plays that just gave them position at the 40 to start a drive. And I want to go back and look how many times they scored on when Roberts had it over the 25. Like, how many times did that lead to a scoring drive? Those possessions matter. Maybe you can get it from somewhere else, but I know that I can get it from Andre Roberts. And like you said, on a veteran minimum deal. No brainer for me to bring him back and give him a spot.
Yeah, and he was the only returner in the NFL to average 30 yards a return.
Yeah.
He led the NFL in kick return average, man, and was the only returner in the NFL to average 30 yards. So,
and it matters when you have the elite offense that the Bills had. The Bills had good punt returners for years with crappy offenses, and it was fun, but it didn't matter. When you have an offense that can score from anywhere, making it easier on them is only an advantage for your team.
Yeah. So this question from All About Bills, what do you think about us going at Cordero Patterson? Sure. Do you know the only guy in the NFL who averaged more kick return yardage than Cordero Patterson? Andre Roberts. Because Cordero Patterson was number 2 and Andre Roberts was number 1. So honestly, yes, if somehow Andre Roberts retired or got signed by somebody else, sure, I think they would go after a Cordero Patterson because I think they care about that kind of return advantage. One player that could come up, Jamal Agnew, is one of the guys that's out there that is kind of that TJ Yeldon plus Isaiah McKenzie plus Andre Roberts. He's a sneaky value free agent I'm interested in from Detroit, who did kick return, punt return, played running back and gadget receiver. And if we somehow missed out on those guys, he's one of those guys who could consolidate some of those roster spots and give you a chance to have a Jake Kumaro or an active Isaiah Hodgins or an extra defensive back or an extra linebacker on game day by consolidating some of that.
Yeah, Patterson could, and I think I'm seeing it now in the chat too, Patterson could be, Eric's going to kill me for saying it, but he could be your third down back.
He would be Andre Roberts plus TJ Yeldon. He would be that one guy in one body.
Yeah, and so you could save your spot there and have him as running back 3, and I think you'd get more production out of running back 3 than we saw this year, and he'd always be active. You wouldn't need to activate a running back 3 if something happens. He'd be your returner. So again, I think they bring Roberts back. If he doesn't come back, there's scenarios where then maybe they bring McKenzie back and he's that guy, or they look elsewhere, like you said, a couple of names. I feel fine there, but I think Roberts is a lot more valuable to this team. I know there was a lot of argument before the season began. I think he just made his case even stronger with the season that he had of how valuable he is to this team. Yeah,
just looking at this, Cordero Patterson had 64 carries on the season and then 21 catches and was number 2 in the NFL in return yardage. So yeah, maybe. So shifting to the next group is the tight end group, and it's a challenge because I think there was. Anytime you're looking at, we just talked about the most productive receiving core in the NFL, obviously that comes at the cost of another group. So you're talking about Dawson Knox, Tyler Kroft, Lee Smith, Reggie Gilliam. I list Reggie Gilliam there because they technically list him there. Reggie Gilliam played 64 snaps out of the backfield and 8 snaps as an inline tight end. He is a fullback. I don't care what they list him as. I don't care whether he's a special teamer or a fullback. He's not a tight end. He can do some of those inline things, just like you can shift guys around, go in the slot, do other things. But Dawson Knox, I think, had a similar season to his rookie year. Some awesome glimpses of potential, and I've never seen a player so excited to stiff arm after he makes a catch as Dawson Knox is. He's always looking to posterize someone. He makes some awesome contested catches. His catch rate, oddly, he had fewer drops this year, but his catch rate went down. So the fact that his catch rate went down when Josh Allen made a meteoric rise in accuracy and completion percentage is odd to me. And I'm sure a healthy portion of that of on-target throws were, I think Eric looked up some stuff, were not ideal, but we certainly didn't get the production we wanted out of tight end this year. I think you can tell a story why, but we didn't get the production we wanted out of tight end.
My biggest concern with the lack of production out of tight end is in the blocking. I think with the type of offense that they had this year, you can do that. You can have this type of offense. Tight end blocking was a problem in the run game. Tight end blocking was a problem if they kept tight ends in the pass game. Blocking was an issue out of that position. I'm fine with Knox as far as I can live with some of the drops. I think it is getting better. I don't think it's as much of a story as we talk about on Twitter. I think that ultimately he's gotten better making plays when he needs to. It hasn't been that dramatic in my opinion. I've seen enough, I think, from a pass catching standpoint that if he was utilized more often in the offense, I think that his stats would be up there towards the top 15. I don't think he can be an average tight end 1 in the NFL right now. I don't know where his ceiling is, but I think he can be that if the offense is going to him. But he's not going to be able to do that if he can't learn to be an NFL tight end when it comes to blocking, especially in the run game. You have Lee Smith. He doesn't really provide anything else. That's a weird piece. I don't know that you want that type of guy in anymore. He kind of shows your hand as to what you're doing most times when he's in there. I don't know where they get better blocking to just come in off the street. I don't know who that is that they can come in that can also be that threat that Knox is in the passing game. So I'm all for suggestions. I know Smith is a name that has been tossed around out there. A number of other guys. Draft is quite a few tight end prospects. But again, tight end prospects can take. Yeah. So that's not guaranteed to come in 2021 and give you proven production. So I don't know that we see any type of fix that really adds much more production to it. To get 700-800 yards out of a tight end with a little bit more production. I think that's probably about the cap. I don't think you're going to see a ton more production out of a Bills tight end in 2021.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, unless you somehow unlock a Darren Waller that is switching over from another team, I just don't see it. There's a couple different options. Obviously, you have some of the veteran guys. Taylor here talking about you could get a Kyle Rudolph or someone like that at the tail end of their career, like they went after Greg Olsen. I don't think that's out of the question. I think you could lure a Jared Cook for one season. I think you could try to find some Band-Aid. They're not going to afford the Hunter Henrys of the world. The names that have been talked about are more in the realm. I brought up Jonnu Smith. I know our friend Nate Geary likes Gerald Everett from the Rams. I think those guys are in that $6 to $8 million range. I don't know that they want to spend that. I think, Eric had brought up that he's not sure he sees a sizable enough difference of the, Jonnu Smith has been more productive with fewer opportunities than Dawson Knox, but the numbers aren't amazing. It's not like they're you're still projecting where those things come from and what we're able to kind of figure out to where it's at. So we'll see what things come along, but I think that tight end here I had at a C for this year. I think that there was some things I think you could go with a C-, and that sadly probably the best value we had at tight end was Lee Smith because he was such a good blocker. It's sad that was about it. We saw glimpses of Tyler Kroft, and I'm not out on Dawson Knox. I don't hate Dawson Knox. I'm open to that. I'm not planning on Dawson Knox becoming a tight end 1. I'm going to prepare as though I need to find a tight end 1, and if he develops, he's a bonus.
Totally fair. I gave him a D as a group. Very disappointed in the run blocking, really, this year. Like, if there's one thing you need to really pick up as a tight end, it's that. I thought it was weird how Kroft didn't get a lot of run this year. I thought he was actually productive when he was playing.
I almost wonder Kroft. If it was forced evaluation of Dawson Knox. I don't know.
Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know that we'll ever get an answer as to what happened there. I liked Kroft, actually. If they can find a guy like that, I think that works. Interested to see Tommy Sweeney if he comes back. Sure. And what he provides in the preseason. I thought he had some interesting stuff his rookie year, some interesting looks in the preseason for him. Clearly fits the mold of what they'd like. I think he can be a good blocker. But yeah, until they fix that ability to block, I'm not so much worried about the production in the passing game. I think it will come. I think they can develop Knox or get a guy in there to provide some of that, but they need to be better as that additional offensive lineman when they're called upon. So I can't get them up over a D.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. The final group we're going to go into before we end with some season awards is offensive line. I think that it was weird because there are some really strong points. I think that Deion Dawkins had a really good season and really stepped forward from the year before. I think Darrell Williams is a phenomenal value for what we got him at. I think that Mitch Morse was oddly beleaguered in the season that people think he had versus I thought he was good. I thought that, both Eric and Anthony did an awesome breakdown of film explaining how he was kind of misused and how with all the changes and no offseason we're forced into more of a zone offense because we didn't have the reps in to do the pin and pull and the gap run that we had previously. I think Mitch Morse is fine and a big piece of our future. And then we had the revolving doors at guard and that, Cody Ford played injured and struggled when he was out there. Brian Winters was terrible. Ike Bacher was a little bit better than Brian Winters, so everyone was excited because he was not as bad as Brian Winters. And then John Feliciano started well and went kind of downhill and ended the season pretty poorly, honestly. And I won't be sad if we have 2 new starting guards going into next season.
Yeah, so it's super frustrating. I had this offensive line graded out individually as tackles B, guards D, center B.
Yeah,
and
I think that's spot on. I think you could even argue B+ at tackle.
Sure, yeah, I'm open to that. Guard play really frustrated me all year long. I am not high on Feliciano at all. I think a lot of people love him. I think he says all the right things.
They like the idea of him more than the player.
He's got that edge. He's got that mean ability. He'll fight for Josh Allen. That's all fine and dandy. I think a little bit towards the end of the year, he showed us maybe more who he is. I think when the Bills signed him in free agency, we were a little suspect. Like, this guy, that's a little bit of money for a guy that really hasn't done anything. Had a really nice season, but I think this year regressed back to maybe who he is more as a player and what we could probably expect of him as a player. I think pretty frustrating. Yeah, Winters, Bacher, total replacement level guard play. Bacher had a couple moments where it looked good, and maybe he can develop into something good as a rotational piece. All I see right now in the middle of that line is rotational pieces next to Mitch Morse, and I think why Mitch Morse was looked at as being so poor this year was the same thing when we flip over to the other side of the ball of how Ed Oliver looked poor. It's the pieces around him. You don't have good guard play next to you. It's really hard to look good as a center, and Morse still did it. He still looked good, just you're not going to see it on the broadcast that Mitch Morse is having a really good game. Like, that just doesn't pop up in the broadcast. So definitely something they need to fix. The good news is fixing guard is probably one of the spots where you can do it of value. You can find guards in the draft. There's going to be some big, nasty boys in this draft coming up that I think you can get in and might be able to compete this year. And I don't think the production that they have to replace is crazy. We talk about rookies come in all the time. I'm worried about proven NFL production. I don't know. Can they be worse than Cody Ford and Ike Bacher and Brian Winters? I don't know. I mean, that'd be tough. So we'll see. I think it's an easier spot to replace. I think it's not like we're out there desperately looking for a star tackle at either spot. You got to get Williams back in here, hopefully, but that needs secure. You're not paying for a big time center like they did with Mitch Morse, as long as they don't end up replacing him. So I think guards are relative. If you're going to have a weakness on your most dominant side of the ball, I think if you ask me, I would pick in the interior offensive line. I think it's one of the more easily replaceable.
So you want to know the crazy part? I didn't realize till prepping for the show, we only have 6 offensive line under contract next year, and 3 of them are Jordan Devey, Ryan Bates, and Trey Adams. The only starters under contract are Deion Dawkins, Mitch Morse, and technically Cody Ford.
Right.
So we have some significant decisions to make. So right now we don't have Ike Bacher's a restricted free agent. That's pretty easy to bring him back with no real issue. They'll give him a minimum tender offer and he'll be back. They need to decide, I'm okay if John Feliciano is back on a really cheap deal. I don't want to pay him any money. I'm not interested in Brian Winters coming back. I'm not interested in, some huge shift there. I do desperately want Darrell Williams back. I think that he has earned a contract. I think luckily he finished the season just even enough and not at the all-pro level they were touting him as midseason that maybe he doesn't break the bank, but he's going to not be cheap to get back. And then, I do think you see a lot of the names out here, the Creed Humphrey, Landon Dickerson, Wyatt Davis, all the guys that are nice either at pick 30 or pick 62. I think guard is a spot that you could, if you hit right, we could bring in a guy and be able to go and get that kind of starter to plug in there. And then, hey, we have like Botker competing, and maybe we go into next year where it's Deion Dawkins, Cody Ford, Mitch Morse, our first round pick, and then Darrell Williams, and that's our offensive line going into next year. But we're going to need some investment because right now we only have 2 lockdown starters under contract, and Cody Ford's number 3.
Yep, somebody will pop up.
Yeah.
Also, somebody's going to get shaken off a team somewhere. If the Bills don't get one of those top guards, somebody else is going to get them. You're going to see some vet shake off a team and want to go on one last Super Bowl run. That's the nice thing, too, about where the Bills are at right now. They don't have a lot of money. They're going to have to pay to keep some of their own guys. But guys want to come play for Buffalo now. And there's going to be some guys that see an opportunity to come play guard for a team that's going to be in the hunt as long as Josh Allen stays healthy. And so you might be able to get some deals at the end of careers of we'll talk about some on the defensive side of the ball, but guys that are just kind of journeymen now that are looking for a spot to win a title with. The Bills are that team now. So I think we're freaked out a little bit about the salary cap. I think some of that's the old Bills mind state that we have to overpay for every single free agency to come play in Buffalo. I think Buffalo has turned into a destination, at least from the perspective of this is one of 8 places right now in the NFL that are primed to win a Super Bowl in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where we're going to get values now that frustrate other teams. So we'll see where that goes. Dylan's question here, if we had done like the trade that the Dolphins had where you were, all of a sudden we stumbled into the number 1 overall pick because we traded away a guy and had somebody else's pick. Of course, it would be the year that there's no premium pass rusher because I want a Myles Garrett or a Bosa brother, and there's none of those this year. So we'd trade down to get a bunch of picks.
I was going to say I'd trade out of it.
Yeah.
To anyone who wanted it for as many
get everything we could get. Okay. All right, to close out the show for tonight, we want to go and we're going to have our own season-ending awards. So we wanted to go through, and we'll pick the same ones that the NFL uses here. And I think some of them are pretty easy, but maybe a couple are debatable. We'll start with MVP. Is there any chance it's not Josh Allen?
No, this year's been the worst year when I wrote all these down to do it. It might be Josh Allen across the board. I don't know. We'll see.
Sure.
But yeah, no, Josh Allen's the MVP. I want to make a case for Stephon Diggs, but
so I did differentiate there. Offensive Player of the Year, I gave to Stephon Diggs just out of principle. You could easily give both to Josh Allen, but I did give Offensive Player of the Year to Stephon Diggs.
I did
MVP
too.
to Josh Allen.
Yeah, just out of what's right to do.
Oh yeah, yeah. All right, so now maybe a little more interesting these last ones. For Most Improved Player, who did you go with?
Josh Allen.
That's the right answer. It is. I went with Deion Dawkins because I think Deion Dawkins went from pretty good to franchise left tackle. I think Deion Dawkins had like a top 5 season this year and was really, really good. And I'm excited about him going forward. So yeah, just giving him a little shine. But yeah, Josh Allen was maybe the most improved player in NFL history from his second year to third year.
Dawkins is a good one. I thought Dawkins finished really strong the previous year or two, so he was like already, to me, sort of borderline there. But yeah, Josh is elite.
Yeah,
we'll probably never see anything like it again.
No, literally historic, the biggest in NFL history. Comeback player.
I went with Harrison Phillips.
Okay.
Because I thought he really came on at the end of the year, and he got the kind of frustrating bump in the middle of a season where you've come back from an injury, you've done all this rehab, you go out there, you aren't the guy that you were before the injury, and the team knows it, and you know it, and the fans know it, and you get pulled, and you aren't active for a number of games, and then you come back and you play really well. And I think that mentality was super important to Sean McDermott and Eric Washington and these guys. I think they're going to have a lot of faith in him going forward, and I think he finished strong. And that kind of thing, man, if you've never had to go through like an injury and physical therapy, and I've never had to do it to the way NFL players do, but the mental strain and then to have a hiccup like that in the middle of the season, that kind of thing, if you're not wired the right way, and Sean McDermott talks about this with the DNA and all that stuff, if you aren't wired the right way, that can really just kind of end your season. A lot of guys can just kind of write it off and work towards next year. He didn't, and I thought he did a really good job, and that's why I picked him as a comeback player of the year. He wasn't super productive this year, but he got better as the year went on.
So it's funny. I cheated just like Jack did here, even though it wasn't with the Bills. I picked Darrell Williams.
That's a good one.
In that it wasn't with the Bills coming back from last year, but the nasty injury that he came back from, losing the whole year, then being rushed back a little bit early, and obviously struggled in some of that. The level that he jumped back to coming back from that injury, I thought Darrell Williams was a good one.
And I didn't think he'd be good again.
No, I thought that was I thought that was like a Leandrin Waddle level flyer,
right? Of
just like, hey, it's a luxury veteran backup guy just in case. And he was a stellar starter that now I'm sad.
Definitely.
And that's a good one. Get back. Rookie of the year, pretty easy one, I think.
Yeah, I went with Tyler Bass.
Oh, interesting. I went Gabe Davis. I went
come
Gabe
on.
Davis. So.
That's not that easy. I thought Tyler Bass was the easy answer.
I like it. No, that's a good choice. I'm biased. I normally tout the kickers and the specialists. I didn't even think about it. Breaking the NFL scoring record for rookies and team record for points that's a good choice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it had a little bit of a hiccup to start the year. Yep. Again, another guy mentally tough responded well.
I think you yelled at me a couple times.
Yeah, every time he missed a kick, I would just yell at you in Slack. Greg, go get your guy. No, I thought he had a great year. Gabe Davis has a case.
Yeah.
There's a case, and super lucky that we can have a conversation and an argument about who is the rookie of the year. That means you've done a pretty good job.
Yeah. So we tried to keep it pretty positive here, but anybody that came out the other direction, your biggest disappointment or biggest concern?
Well, do you have a defensive player of the year? We did offensive player of the year.
Well, let's save that for next week. Save that for next week.
We'll do defense.
In there, and we'll even sprinkle in a couple. I'll make up some defensive awards.
All right, disappointment this year. Interior offensive line. Yeah. We talked about it is the biggest problem I think that the Bills have to address this year, and we'll talk about the other problems on the other side of the ball, but it's right there. Interior offensive line. I guess the runner-up would be Dawson Knox in the tight end position if we're just talking offense. I'll just give a spoiler alert. My biggest disappointment this year was Trent Murphy. Obviously, that's my guy. Totally disappointed. Was super wrong on Trent Murphy, but on the offensive side of the ball, it's got to be interior offensive line for me.
I think that's the right choice. I think if you maybe my level of expectation, I could make an argument for Devin Singletary because I kind of thought we were going to come in and have a really killer season. But overall, it's nice that we're having a nitpick with some of those kind of things, and that if your biggest issue is, Singletary still had, 1,000 yards from scrimmage and he was a disappointment, that's not too bad. So, and that we still broke team records and had that we had the offensive line challenges that we had. But yeah, luckily I think we're going to be there, and I think that we're going to have some similar debates this year. And honestly, if you heard Brandon Beane talk about, hey, if we had known what the money situation was going to be like going into this year, maybe we would have made some decisions differently. Honestly, I think Trent Murphy's one of those. Yeah. I think that in a different season where they got to see AJ Epinesa, and there, I think they would have cut him, maybe some of the other signings, but we'll talk about some of those next week on the defense. Anything you want to leave the folks with here before we sign out?
No, man, I'm super excited for this offseason. I guess kind of leave people with what we started with, that this is a good Buffalo Bills team. This is a top team in the NFL. They're going into an offseason definitely with some things to fix. There's definitely a gap between them and the Kansas City Chiefs. There's not really much of a gap between them and the other top teams in the NFL. All teams have work to do going into the offseason. There's no team that's perfect. The Bucs have work to do. Kansas City has work to do. So all those teams are in the same position the Bills are, of having work to do, getting up against the cap, things like that when you're a good team. So just try to remember that when you're out there getting in fights with other people about what the Bills need to do this offseason. I think the needs aren't necessarily as dramatic as we might think they are, and they aren't in the position to make any dramatic fixes unless they hit on things. So just take it easy on each other. There isn't a ton left that the Bills need to do to put themselves over the hump of already being a top 5 team in the NFL.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I think there's reason to be optimistic, and the fact that we're bringing back our entire coaching staff, Josh Allen,
Huge.
our entire front office, we didn't get cherry picked anywhere.
Yep.
I think there is reason for genuine excitement going into next year, and I think that we're going to dive into those reasons why coming up here in free agency and the draft. So,
Yeah, man.
check out everything we have coming. Check out the other guys over on the Hoof and Disguise Coverage, the film breakdowns with Eric. Anthony's been jumping on him with there a ton and looked fantastic. Make sure you guys are checking out everything that we have going on here. On behalf of everybody at Cover One, Aaron Quinn, Greg Tompsett, you've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.